What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade DPS. So Nightblades, not much has changed for you guys between Hailstorm and Greymoor. You're pretty much exactly where you have been in the past here. There was a potential for running dual wield, but they kind of killed that with the Greymoor launch. Not necessarily killed, but definitely made it a lot weaker than your typical bow setup. So whatever you have currently on Hailstorm is definitely going to be of use here in Greymoor as well. So really not much to talk about here with the Stamina Nightblade. They're pretty solid all around. Probably have the reputation of being a very complicated rotation just because of the bow proc, but once you get used to it, the Nightblade is actually a very rewarding class to play on, because it really does reward you for really being able to lightly will and know your rotation. But Nightblade's pretty strong class overall. They are definitely not the strongest stamina DPS. That still kind of goes towards the stamina necromancer just because of major vulnerability, but they're still very powerful setup nonetheless. So, like the rest of our other build videos, we will not be going over any sort of gear. Gear is reserved for the Stamina DPS gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right-hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear you should be running, go ahead and click on that, and then come back here. This video will be talking about just the skills and the rotation itself. So let's go ahead and get started here with our dual wield bar. So we are running Killer's Blade, Surprise Attack. Now, you might not be using Surprise Attack. I do believe that the Rapid Strikes ability here under the dual wield line does actually end up pulling a little bit better DPS compared to Surprise Attack, but Surprise Attack can be easier to weave for some people, plus you also do grant a small reduction in physical resistance when you use it, so it might be worth running Surprise Attack still, depending on how you feel about Rapid Strikes weaving. The DPS difference is fairly small overall, but Rapid Strikes is going to be the slightly stronger spammable in a single target scenario. Next, we have a flex spot here. I have Camouflaged Hunter, but you can run something else. So if you want some additional survivability, for example, you could run Deadly Cloak, which gives you the major evasion, but it also ends up dealing damage as well. So it does kind of give you some additional survivability as well as deal a little bit of additional damage as well. You could run something like Vigor instead for the additional heal. So it's kind of up to you whether you want to stick with something like Camouflaged Hunter or you want to run a different ability here. Camouflaged Hunter can still be beneficial, particularly if you are anticipating lower than average Minor Berserk uptime, because it does grant you that Minor Berserk buff if you deal crit damage from an enemy's flank. So simply speaking, DPS will be facing the boss's backside, so you should be able to practice fairly consistently on many fights in the game. Then we have Relentless Focus. This is the bow proc. Then we have Barbed Trap for the minor force buff. Then we have Incapacitating Strike here as our main ultimate of choice. We also get a little bit of sustain as well with the additional Reeve bonus that we get from Incap. On our back bar, we are running Dark Shade. Even though it does deal magic damage and therefore doesn't scale very well off of our CP, the stats itself, the damage does scale off of our weapon damage and max stamina, so it actually deals a decent amount of damage even though it only deals magic damage. Then we have Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes for sustain if you need it. I personally have found that you don't really need it in a raid environment, but you also get a heal as well. So it could be useful to just help out your healers, as well as just additional sustain for those groups that might not be in a very organized group, but missing things like Hersine. You might be missing Symphony of Blades or Sentinel Recruit Gums. So this could still be beneficial to run here, but you can swap this out for another ability if you so desire. And then finally, we have Barbed Trap again. This is just for additional weapon damage bonus. You could replace this with any other fighter skilled ability or any other ability of your choice, depending on what you need in your build. Finally, Incap. Again, you do need to have Incap on your back bar in order to maintain the Hemorrhage passive under the Assassination line, because we do need to have an Assassination ability slotted here on the back bar. Of course, you could run any of these abilities instead of these two abilities here, so if you want, you can run Flawless Stonebreaker that way, but it's kind of up to you. I just find Incap is probably going to be the easiest way to get this passive on your back bar here. That pretty much covers it for skills. So about the rotation itself, like I said, Nightblades have this reputation of having a complicated rotation. That's mainly because of the bow proc here. The bow proc, basically, once you hit 5 light attacks, you will be able to fire off a bow that deals a very hefty amount of damage and also heals you if you're within melee range of the whatever it is that you happen to hit here. Now, the challenging part is timing those 5 light attacks. But for your rotation itself, typically speaking, you'll want to pre-buff first with Siphoning and Relentless, and then you want to open up with Barbed Trap for the minor force, and then lay down your dots. Fairly easy. Then go to your back bar. Re-up your dots here. I typically just rebuff Darkshade every second time I'm on my back bar here, so there's going to be some downtime on Darkshade. But that's up to you, whether you want to re-up it on cooldown or not. You should be aiming for at least 2 bow procs to go off every time you're on your front bar. That is going to be the ideal scenario. They get at least two off every time you're on your front bar. Again, Darkshade, it's up to you whether you want to break your front bar rotation and recast it, or you want to wait just until you're upping Endless Hail and Poison Injection instead. Now, I do want to talk about how to use your bow proc, because I do see a lot of beginner Nightblades make this mistake here when they're trying to use the bow proc. So when you're doing the bow proc, what I see some people do is they do something like this. Now that is not the way you want to use your bow proc, and that's mainly because you're using 6 light attacks to proc it. So for doing light attacks only, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bow proc. That's typically what I see. We're ignoring the ability cast between your light attacks. We're assuming we're doing ability cast between our light attacks here. So you're basically wasting your last light attack there. So that's the 6th light attack you're doing there. You're basically wasting that because you cannot take that and apply it to the second bow proc. So once you have the bow proc active, your light attacks will not be generating any more stacks for the next bow proc. You can't save these stacks. So what instead you want to do is you want to do something that looks like this instead. So with just light attacks, ignoring the ability hits, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Then when you're at your 4th light attack, you do light attack into your bow proc. That basically allows you to avoid losing out on that 1 light attack, which gives you, in turn, more bow procs per cast of Relentless Focus. You want to get as many bow procs as you can out of Relentless Focus because that is a major source of damage outside of Execute. Once you get to Execute, you're just going to use Killer's Blade. The only dots you should be maintaining are going to be Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Barbed Trap, and then you're just going to be using Killer's Blade as your spammable there once you hit Execute, which for Nightblades is going to be 25% or lower. You will not be using your bow proc at all, so you can just let that run out. You don't need to re-up your Siphoning if you're running that at all. So Execute usually lasts a fairly short amount of time, so you don't necessarily need additional sustain. You can, of course, maintain Siphoning if you need to sustain, but hopefully you won't need it, depending on how organized your group is and how good your supports are with providing additional sustain that way. So we're going to do our tournament limit parts here so you guys get an idea of the full rotation as well as the amount of DPS that a Nightblade is able to pull in comparison to other classes. Remember that the trial dummy does not necessarily represent in-trial DPS. We are missing several debuffs and buffs on the trial dummy. For example, we're missing Minor Courage, we're missing Tremor Scale, we're missing Martial Knowledge, we're missing Zens, so all that will contribute to more DPS. On the flip side, dummy also doesn't hit back, doesn't have any sort of fight mechanics, so we're just sitting here parsing on the dummy. In an actual trial, you obviously have mechanics you're going to have to deal with. You might be moving around a lot, the boss might be moving around a lot, so some of your abilities might not be hitting, there might be invulnerability periods or periods where you're not going to be able to hit the boss, so that'll end up lowering your DPS. Don't use this as a proxy for the amount of damage you should expect to see in a trial. This is more as a comparison because the trial dummy does standardize parsers across all the different classes in the game, with the exception of Necromancers with their major vulnerability, of course. So, let's go ahead and get started here. Now you will notice I am using Poison Injection when our dummy is above 50% health. Don't necessarily have to do it. Some people will actually not use poison injection until the boss or the dummy is below 50% health. Kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. I personally don't, just because it makes it easier for me to just do the rotation that way. But again, it's a personal preference kind of thing. Now, because they did cap the Maelstrom bow damage, so the last 4 ticks of your Maelstrom bow deals the same amount of damage, you can actually re-up your Maelstrom buff a little bit early if you would like. Didn't quite make it there for that last spell proc. So around this time here, this is when you can re-up your Endless Hail, not necessarily worry about losing any damage here because of the changes that they made with the way the damage stacks up. So this is going to be a fairly rare occurrence with Stamina Nightblades. It could be way more common with Magic Nightblades. But sometimes you're going to be able to get your bow proc off when you're in the middle of your backburner rotation like you saw there. That instant, you're just going to bar swap and then just fire off your bow and then go back to whatever it is you were doing on your back bar. And it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. So in order to push the highest amount of DPS, you'll want to bar swap and use that bow. Of course, you can also just sit on it if you'd like. It's up to you. Like that, for example, you would be sitting on it for a little bit. It's kind of up to you. It'll make your rotation a lot easier, but you will end up losing your overall damage. So example here, swap bow proc and then go back to finish off that. Nightblades benefit the most from a fully dynamic rotation, but this might not always be possible in a trial scenario, so that's why you might want to hold on to that bow proc instead of, swapping to your front bar and getting rid of it. Just missed that bow proc again. Thought it'd be fast enough. Always try to time your incap so you're getting your bow proc off while you have the damage debuff from incap still active. You will normally be able to do it even without trying, but it is something you want to pay attention to just in case. Alright, we're nearing execute now. Remember, in execute, we're only going to be using Endless Hail, Poison Injection, and our execute. So we're not even going to bother to be using our bow, and you'll see why when we take a look at the combat report at the end. I'll just re-up Barbed Trap for the Minor Force, but beyond that, we're not going to re-up our buffs. We're just going to be spamming Killer's Blade instead. There you go. That is the rotation for Stamina Nightblade DPS there. Here's the combat report here, pulling about 80.8k. You can pull higher with Tremor Scale because you will be able to shift your CP points around a little bit, but that is with Tremor Scale, which we don't have. So realistically, you'd probably be closer to about 82k on a Stamina Nightblade using this parse just as a baseline comparison. Now, as to why we're not using our bow proc in execute, you can see here that our max hit is only 87.7k versus our Killer's Blade, which hit for 122.5k. We don't necessarily want to use our bow proc here because we're not going to be able to nearly match what the Killer's Blade is able to hit here in execute. So that's why we're dropping our bow proc in execute and just running Killer's Blade instead here. But pretty much what you would pretty much standard here. Again, if you're running Deadly Cloak instead of Camouflage Hunter, you might be able to hit a little bit higher DPS. It's going to be very comparable either way. And again, if you're running Ravage Strikes instead of Surprise Attack, same thing. You're going to see a little bit of an increase, but not really too much. With those two combined, you'll probably be able to push another maybe 1k or so DPS out of your parse, but that's pretty much within margin of error. Crit RNG can probably explain 1k difference or so, so it's not something that you absolutely have to do here for Stamina Nightblade. That pretty much covers it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.